What defines a Christian qua Christian? Oh my goodness, definitely having a bad hair upload. Um, so it it's actually a bit more complicated than we would suppose by the cavalier way that the term Christian is thrown around. Uh, it it's a bit more complex than that. So we can see with this more precise definition of Christian that it's possible, as I was saying, for a person to believe in God and to be actively involved in church activities, but to not be truly a Christian. When the cares of life weigh down on such persons, they may find it difficult to continue with church or the open expression of belief in God uh, because of psychological reasons or emotional reasons. They have other things taking up their time that they give priority to, or they have different values. They develop different values. They no longer value going to church as much as doing something else. And I'm not saying this totally describes every professing apostate, but it is a possibility for perhaps many of them. But you see what is going on in this hypothetical situation. You see what's going on here, don't you? It is people who looked like they were Christians, tares. You remember the parable of the tares and the wheat, but they no longer look Christian. So they were not first saved and then lose their salvation. Rather, they were never really saved in the first place. They looked like Christians. They acted like Christians as far as outward appearance goes. They probably even sincerely thought they were Christians, but in point of fact, they never really were. It is theoretically possible for other apostates to have discovered compelling reasons for disbelief. There's many people we could think of that say they did believe, but they can no longer believe, and then they go on to explain through philosophical arguments why they think God does not exist. What might such arguments be? The problem of evil, perhaps? Even many atheists now admit that that argument is unsound. And didn't the question ever occur to the apostates before they left the faith? If they were truly mature in their faith, and their thought life was under the lordship of Christ, then of course they were aware of the problem of evil while remaining unfazed by it, I would think. Another possible argument might be the hiddenness of God. Not everybody believes in him, but we would expect, apparently, that everybody would believe in God if he is real. But this didn't pose a problem to them before, but yet they had to have been aware that not everybody believed as they did, as the apostates did. So the apostates, when they were still Christians, they were aware that not everybody was a Christian, so they were aware of the problem of divine hiddenness, but they didn't find it compelling at that time to lose their faith, to give up on their faith. But now they are using this as an argument. Maybe there isn't enough evidence to compel belief in God. That's a third possible argument against the existence of God for somebody who believed at one time but no longer does. But absence of evidence is certainly not evidence of absence. And I think these three arguments pretty much exhaust the list of contemporary atheological arguments. This is to say that if apostates are sincere in their intellectual doubts, then it seems their faith was perhaps not very deep to begin with, which is exactly what we would expect if they weren't real Christians to begin with. I should add that there are sincere intellectual doubts all Christians struggle with from time to time, but let God be true and every man a liar, even myself if I'm struggling with doubts. Call me a liar and God the truth. So I don't want to minimize the force of doubt, but God, according to Christians, is all-powerful. He is able to keep us from being tempted beyond what we are able to bear. Now let's try a thought experiment. Think of an apostate that you know personally. I said I wanted to keep this in the abstract, so let's just imagine a hypothetical person that doesn't really exist instead of somebody you actually know. And let's go up to them in our minds and ask them, why are you, John, let's say his name is John, John, why are you an apostate? It's not absolutely certain, but chances are that John will respond by giving some sort of philosophical argument which they intend to be persuasive that God probably or definitely does not exist. Now, they don't necessarily intend to persuade you, the questioner, but they will view this as a persuasive argument, at least in their own mind, from their own perspective. So, what this experiment tells us is that the apostate seems to want to be perceived, at least apostates like John, they want to be perceived as enlightened, it seems. That is, while they did believe in God at one point in time, as they matured intellectually, they came to view their former belief as untenable. But again, there really isn't much the intellectual atheist has to offer that Christians haven't already heard before and been wrestling with for thousands of years. And we are unfazed by such arguments. The apostates themselves were unfazed by such arguments, perhaps, until they needed them to appear enlightened instead of embittered. I don't mean to suggest that all actual apostates fall into this camp. I cannot repeat that enough. I only mean that it seems this could describe, possibly, many apostates. In any case, it seems that most, perhaps all, apostates, if we think of them as hypothetical in the abstract, not actual individual people, but if there were to be an apostate, this would describe him or her most of the time, perhaps all the time. It seems that most apostates, in this hypothetical sense, were not really Christians in the first place. Since eternal security is apparently true, then it seems no actual apostates, real actual individual people. So we're transitioning now from the abstract to individual actual persons. When such a person claims, since eternal security is true, apparently, then it seems no actual apostate could really have been a Christian at one time. When a person claims to be a former believer, then I can only conclude that they are mistaken. As surprising as that may sound to them or to me, and it does sound remarkable to me, at the very least, either they still are a Christian or they never were a true Christian to begin with. Finally, a true Christian, and again, I don't want to sound presumptuous or like I'm reading your mind. If you happen to be a recent deconvert, I don't want to be presumptuous that I know exactly what's in your mind and your heart. But that does seem to be the conclusion. If we first accept eternal security, it seems that that's the only possible implication, that you or somebody you know that is an apostate really wasn't a Christian in the first place. So that does sound surprising, but that does seem to be the rational, not emotional, but rational conclusion to make. Finally, for a true Christian, a human being that is totally following Christ, the idea of apostatizing could never even occur to them. After all, such ideas are taken seriously only outside of the mind of Christ. And as Paul says, a Christian is going to have the mind of Christ. So I suppose the idea itself could occur to us, but we wouldn't really take it seriously if we are following Christ. And that doesn't mean that there aren't difficult situations which come up. That doesn't mean that Christians are perfect all the time. But as far as not sinning and being totally obedient to Christ. But that does seem to be the ideal, that if we are a true Christian, we're going to be following Christ. We're not going to be turning away from Christ and disobeying Him.